The thunderous crack of the auctioneer's gavel shattered the summer air as Cassandra Blake flinched, her delicate wrists raw from the iron shackles that had become her constant companions these past 3 weeks. St. Louis, 1876, a city where fortunes were made and broken daily, where the frontier still beckoned beyond the Mississippi, and where a woman with no family could find herself on an auction block through nothing more than cruel circumstance and crueler men. "Next up, gentlemen," the stout auctioneer announced, his voice carrying across the dusty square where 24 men had gathered, their eyes appraising her like cattle. "A fine young woman, educated, can read and write, good for housekeeping, cooking, or whatever services you might require." The implication in his tone made Cassandra's stomach twist. She had never imagined herself here. Just 6 months prior, she had been teaching at a small school in Pennsylvania, but the death of her uncle, her only living relative, had forced her west in search of employment. The stagecoach robbery that had stripped her of her meager possessions had been only the beginning of her downfall. The bidding began at $20. Cassandra kept her eyes downcast, unable to meet the gazes of those who saw her as property. The bids climbed slowly, and with each call her future darkened. $40, called a gruff voice that made her blood run cold. She dared a glance and saw him Silas Thornton, the very man who had orchestrated her descent into this nightmare after she had refused his advances at the boarding house, where she'd briefly found work. His thin lips curled into a smile beneath his neatly trimmed mustache, his eyes promising retribution. "45, countered another voice, belonging to a red-faced man whose reputation for cruelty toward his servants was well known even to newcomers like herself. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. The crowd had thinned as the bidding climbed, but the remaining men represented no salvation. It was then that she noticed him, standing at the edge of the gathering. Unlike the others in their town clothes, he wore dusty riding clothes, a worn leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. A stranger, clearly just arrived. His posture suggested a casual interest, but something in the intensity of his gaze as it met hers spoke of deeper attention. Desperation, that most potent of motivators, surged through her veins. As the auctioneer prepared to bring down his gavel on Thornton's final bid of $60, Cassandra acted on instinct alone. "Please," she whispered, loud enough for only the stranger to hear as he turned to leave, her eyes locking with his. "Please buy me." The man paused, his head tilting slightly as he studied her. A long moment passed between them, a silent communication that seemed to span lifetimes. Then, with deliberate slowness, the cowboy raised his hat, revealing a strong-jawed face weathered by sun and wind, and piercing blue eyes that held both kindness and steel. $100, he called out, his voice deep and steady. The crowd turned in surprise, murmurs rippling through the gathering. Thornton's face contorted with anger. $110, Thornton countered, his voice tight. The stranger's expression never changed. $200. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up as he looked between the two men. $200. Do I hear any other bids? Thornton's face reddened as he glared at the newcomer, then at Cassandra. For a terrible moment, she thought he would continue, but after calculating glance at the stranger's calm demeanor and the gun at his hip, Thornton stepped back with a sneer. "Sold," the auctioneer announced with unmistakable glee. "To the gentleman in the back for $200. Relief and fear warred within Cassandra's chest as the officials removed her shackles. She had escaped Thornton, but what fate awaited her now? The stranger approached, paid the sum in gold pieces, and received the bill of sale without comment. Only when they had walked several paces from the auction block did he speak, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. "Quinn Blackwood," he said simply. "I've got a room at the Frontier Hotel where you can clean up and rest, then we need to talk about getting you home, miss." "Cassandra Blake," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But I have no home to return to, Mr. Blackwood." Something in his eyes softened. "Everyone has somewhere they belong, Miss Blake. We just need to find yours." He paused, then added, "I didn't buy you to own you, I bought your freedom. The papers will be yours as soon as we're somewhere private." Cassandra felt tears threatening to spill. "Why would you help a stranger, Mr. Blackwood?" His lips curved into a small smile as he glanced skyward for a moment. "Let's just say I've seen enough injustice in this world to last several lifetimes. Besides," he added, guiding her gently through the busy street, "my sister would haunt me from the grave if I rode past a woman in need." She followed him, this mysterious benefactor whose act of kindness seemed so out of place in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty for months. As they walked toward the hotel, Cassandra couldn't help but study his profile: the strong jaw, the straight nose, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. For the first time in a very long while, she felt the faintest flicker of hope. What she didn't yet know was that Quinn Blackwood had demons of his own, and that the path to freedom, true freedom, would take them both across the dangerous frontier, through trials that would test their very souls, and into a love neither of them had ever dared to imagine. The Frontier Hotel stood 3 stories tall, its faded elegance a testament to better days. Inside, the lobby maintained a certain dignity despite the worn carpets and furniture. Quinn approached the front desk, Cassandra a step behind him, acutely aware of the stares her disheveled appearance attracted. "My sister has arrived," Quinn informed the clerk smoothly, his tone brooking no argument. "We'll need hot water sent up." The clerk's dubious glance between them suggested he didn't believe the fabrication for a moment, but Quinn's steady gaze and the flash of gold coins ended any potential questions. "Room 212, sir. I'll have water sent up immediately." The stairs creaked beneath their boots as they climbed to the second floor. Quinn's room was sparse but clean: a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a washstand in the corner. He immediately moved to the window, scanning the street below with the watchfulness of a man accustomed to danger. "No sign of your admirer from the auction," he commented, "but I wouldn't put it past him to have friends." Cassandra hugged herself, suddenly feeling the vulnerability of her situation. She was alone with a man she'd known for less than an hour, dependent entirely on his continued goodwill. As if sensing her discomfort, Quinn pulled a chair away from the table. "Please sit. You're safe here." A knock at the door announced the arrival of the hot water. Quinn admitted a young boy carrying 2 large buckets, tipped him generously, and secured the door again. "You can wash up," he said, gesturing to the screen in the corner. "I'll step out for a while, give you some privacy. I need to check on my horse anyway." "Mr. Blackwood," Cassandra began, her voice stronger than she expected, "before you go, the papers." His eyebrows raised slightly, but then understanding dawned in his eyes. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew the bill of sale, handing it to her without hesitation. "Smart woman," he said with a nod of approval. "Never take a man at his word alone." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch, setting it on the table. "There's money there, not much, but enough to get you started somewhere if that's what you choose. The door locks from the inside." With that, he donned his hat and left, the door closing quietly behind him. Cassandra stared at the papers in her hand, the reality of her situation slowly sinking in. She was free, legally free. The shock of it made her legs tremble as she sank into the chair. After allowing herself a moment to absorb this new reality, she moved to the washstand. The warm water was a luxury she hadn't experienced in weeks, and she scrubbed away the grime of the auction block with near desperate vigor. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed a woman she barely recognized, thinner, paler, with shadows beneath her hazel eyes that hadn't been there before. She had just finished tidying herself as best she could when another knock came at the door. Warily, she approached. "Miss Blake," Quinn's voice called softly, "it's just me." She opened the door to find him holding a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I took a guess at your size," he said, handing her the package. "The general store had limited options, but it should be better than." He gestured vaguely at her worn dress. Inside the package was a simple blue calico dress, modest but clean and new, along with necessary undergarments and a pair of sturdy boots. "Mr. Blackwood, it's nothing fancy," he interrupted, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Practical for traveling." Traveling, he nodded, moving to pour himself a small measure of whiskey from a flask. St. Louis isn't safe for you now. That man from the auction Thornton, I heard someone call him, he has too much influence here. And a man doesn't take kindly to losing what he considers his property. Where would I go? The question hung in the air between them. Quinn took a slow sip before answering. I'm heading west tomorrow, to Colorado Territory. I've got land there, a small ranch I've been building up for the past 3 years. He met her gaze directly. You're welcome to ride with me as far as Denver, plenty of opportunities for a schoolteacher there. Cassandra's surprise must have shown on her face. Your speech and manner, he explained, and you mentioned teaching when we walked here. You were listening, she said softly. I generally do. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. It's your choice, Miss Blake. The money there is enough for a stagecoach ticket east if that's your preference, or you can take your chances here. Cassandra considered her options, which were painfully few. East held nothing for her parents long dead, her uncle's house sold to pay his debts. Here in St. Louis, Thornton would surely find her again. The West was unknown, dangerous perhaps, but it offered something the other choices didn't, a chance to truly start anew. When do we leave for Colorado? She asked, her decision made. Quinn nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. Dawn. The trail's cooler then. That night, Quinn insisted on sleeping on the floor despite Cassandra's protests. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to his steady breathing, she wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. The man sleeping just a few feet away was still largely a mystery. She knew nothing of his past, his character, his intentions beyond what he'd stated. Yet something about Quinn Blackwood inspired trust, despite her recent harsh lessons in the dangers of misplaced faith. Perhaps it was the straightforward way he spoke, or how his actions consistently matched his words. Or perhaps it was simply that in her darkest moment, when all seemed lost, he had been the one to raise his hat and answer her desperate plea. Whatever tomorrow might bring, Cassandra knew with certainty that had Quinn not appeared at that auction, her future would have held horrors she dared not contemplate. For that alone, she owed him a debt she could never repay. As sleep finally claimed her, she wondered if the journey ahead might offer some way to begin to balance that ledger. Dawn broke with golden fingers of light stretching across the horizon as Quinn secured their provisions to his 2 horses. He'd purchased a gentle mare for Cassandra the previous evening, a practical sorrel with a white blaze down her nose. Her name's Penny, Quinn explained as he adjusted the stirrups to better fit Cassandra's height. She's trail-wise and even-tempered. Just give her clear signals and she'll treat you right. Cassandra eyed the animal with trepidation. I should admit that my riding experience is limited to pony rides at county fairs as a child. A smile tugged at the corner of Quinn's mouth. Then we'll take it slow. Colorado isn't going anywhere. The journey west began easily enough. They followed the Missouri River, keeping to established trails where possible. Quinn proved to be a patient teacher, offering quiet instruction on riding posture, how to communicate with her mount, and the essential skills of wilderness travel. By midday, Cassandra had developed a tentative confidence in the saddle, though every muscle in her body protested the unaccustomed activity. We'll stop here for a spell, Quinn announced as they reached a small clearing beside the river. Rest the horses and ourselves. Dismounting was an ordeal that left Cassandra gasping as her stiff legs nearly buckled beneath her. Quinn steadied her with a hand at her elbow, his touch light and respectful. The soreness passes after a few days, he assured her, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. Walk it off a bit while I see to the horses. As they shared a simple meal of jerky, hard biscuits, and coffee, Cassandra found herself studying her companion. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, she could better see the details of his face, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the western sun. A small scar along his jawline, the dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. You have questions, he stated rather than asked, catching her gaze. Cassandra nodded, slightly embarrassed at being caught staring. Several, in fact, starting with why a rancher from Colorado was in St. Louis at precisely the right moment to hear a desperate woman's whisper. Quinn set his coffee cup down, considering her for a long moment. I was there to settle some business. My former partner died 6 months back, and there were matters with the bank that needed attending. His voice held no inflection, but something in his eyes suggested deeper waters. I'm sorry for your loss, Cassandra offered. He nodded once in acknowledgement. As for the timing, call it providence or luck. I was passing through the square on my way back to the hotel when I saw the auction. Stopped out of. He paused, searching for the right word. Out of a sort of grim curiosity, such things don't happen where I've settled. And then I asked you to buy me, Cassandra said softly. That was terribly forward of me. A genuine smile crossed his face then, transforming his features. It was brave and direct. I appreciate both qualities. The smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. I've seen enough people in chains in my lifetime, more than enough. Something in his tone suggested personal history with the subject, but Cassandra sensed now wasn't the time to press further. What about you, Miss Blake? How does a schoolteacher end up on an auction block in St. Louis? Cassandra traced the rim of her cup with one finger, gathering her thoughts. My parents died of influenza when I was 16. My father's brother took me in, raised me, helped me secure a teaching position in our town in Pennsylvania. When he died last winter, I learned he'd been supporting me far more than I realized. The house was mortgaged, and when it sold, it barely covered his debts. She took a deep breath before continuing. A former student wrote to me about teaching opportunities in Missouri. It seemed a chance for a fresh start. The stagecoach was robbed 2 days from St. Louis. Everything I had was taken: my money, my letters of recommendation, even my trunk of clothes. Quinn listened intently, his expression darkening. And Thornton, the man from the auction, he owned the boarding house where I found work as a maid when I refused his advances. He accused me of stealing from a guest. His word against mine, and in this town, his word carries the weight of gold. She looked down at her hands. 3 weeks in a holding cell, then the auction block. That's the short version of how a Pennsylvania schoolteacher ends up being sold to the highest bidder. Quinn's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath the skin. Some men deserve a special place in hell. I find it hard to disagree, Cassandra replied with unexpected vehemence. They finished their meal in companionable silence. As Quinn packed away their provisions, he glanced at the sky. We should make another 5 miles before sundown. There's a decent camping spot by a creek if memory serves. As he helped her mount Penny, his hands strong and sure at her waist, Cassandra felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. It had been so long since anyone had shown her simple kindness without expecting something in return. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, she said softly, not just for yesterday, but for today as well. He looked up at her, those blue eyes serious and steady. Quinn, he corrected gently. Out here, formality seems rather pointless. Quinn, she repeated, tasting the name. Then I'm Cassandra, not Miss Blake. He nodded once, a silent agreement sealed, then mounted his own horse, a powerful black stallion he called Midnight. As they rode westward, following the sun's gradual descent, Cassandra realized that for the first time in months she felt something like peace. The rhythm of the horse's hooves, the vast open sky above, and the solid presence of the quiet man riding beside her combined to create a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, her life story wasn't finished after all, that new chapters awaited, pages yet to be written. The days fell into a pattern as they traveled west. They would rise with the dawn, break camp quickly, and ride until the heat of midday forced them to rest. Quinn was a man of few words but constant vigilance, his eyes scanning the horizon, alert to every sound. At first, Cassandra attributed his caution to the general dangers of the trail, but as they left Missouri behind and entered Kansas territory, she began to suspect there was more to his watchfulness. Are we being followed? She asked on their 5th evening together as they sat beside a small campfire. The question had been building in her mind since she'd noticed Quinn checking their back trail more frequently. He looked up from cleaning his revolver, surprise flickering briefly in his eyes before his expression settled back into its usual calm. "What makes you ask that? You've been watching our trail, and you've changed our route twice in the last 2 days." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Observant. I was taught that survival often depends on paying attention to details others miss." Quinn nodded slowly, seeming to come to a decision. "I can't be certain, but there's been sign. Could be nothing. Plenty of people travel west this time of year. Could be something. Thornton." The possibility had haunted her nights. Maybe. He reassembled his revolver with practiced efficiency. "Or it could be related to my business in St. Louis. I didn't leave everyone happy." Cassandra wrapped her arms around her knees, suddenly feeling the chill of the evening more keenly. "Should I know what kind of trouble might be following us?" Quinn's expression softened as he looked at her across the fire. "The kind that's mine, not yours, but I promise you this: I won't let harm come to you because of me." The conviction in his voice warmed her more than the flames. "Nor I to you, if it's within my power to prevent it." His eyebrows rose slightly at that, and something that might have been admiration flickered in his gaze. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." The next morning dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds hanging low over the prairie. By mid-morning, rain began to fall in earnest, turning the trail muddy and treacherous. They pressed on until Quinn spotted a dilapidated cabin set back from the trail. "Not ideal," he said, surveying the structure, "but better than drowning out here." The cabin had clearly been abandoned for some time. The roof leaked in several places, but one corner remained relatively dry. Quinn unsaddled the horses and secured them beneath a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin, while Cassandra attempted to clear away the worst of the debris inside. "Home, sweet home," Quinn remarked dryly as he entered, shaking water from his hat. He carried their saddlebags and a bundle of relatively dry wood he'd scavenged. For tonight, at least. Working together, they soon had a small fire going in the stone hearth. The warmth was welcome, but the close quarters made Cassandra acutely aware of Quinn in a way the open trail had not. In the soft glow of the firelight, with rain drumming steadily on the roof, the world seemed to contract to just this space, this moment, this man. "You should change into something dry," Quinn suggested, pointedly keeping his back to her as he arranged their gear. "I'll step outside for a bit. In this downpour, don't be ridiculous." Cassandra surprised herself with her practicality. "Just turn your back, I'll be quick." She changed swiftly, hanging her damp dress near the fire to dry. Quinn had lent her one of his spare shirts, which fell nearly to her knees. The soft flannel carried his scent leather horses and something uniquely him that defied description. "Decent now," she announced, and he turned, his expression carefully neutral despite the faint color that rose in his cheeks at the sight of her in his clothing. "We should eat something," he said gruffly, reaching for their provisions. They shared a simple meal, the rain creating a soothing backdrop to their quiet conversation. Cassandra found herself telling Quinn about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her love of teaching, the books that had shaped her understanding of the world. In turn, he spoke sparingly of his years fighting in the war between the states, his time as a Texas Ranger afterward, and his eventual decision to stake a claim in Colorado. "What's it like?" Cassandra asked. "Your ranch," a certain softness entered his expression then. "It's in a valley with mountains rising on 3 sides. A creek runs through it, clear water, sweet as anything you've ever tasted. The house isn't much, yet 2 rooms with a proper stone chimney, but the barn is solid. Good grazing land for cattle." He paused, seeming to see it in his mind's eye. "In spring, wildflowers carpet the meadows, blues and yellows and purples as far as you can see." "It sounds beautiful," Cassandra said softly. "It is." His gaze returned to her face. "Lonely sometimes, but beautiful." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. 2 people who had known solitude, who understood its weight. The rain continued into the night, forcing them to share the small, dry corner of the cabin. Quinn insisted on sitting up, his back against the wall, while Cassandra used her saddle as a pillow and his coat as a blanket. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her, her mind too full of the man sitting sentinel just a few feet away. Quinn, she whispered into the darkness. Are you awake? Yes, his voice came low and steady. May I ask you something personal? A pause. You can ask. Cassandra gathered her courage. You said you've seen enough people in chains. There was something in the way you said it. The silence stretched so long she thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke, his voice pitched so low she had to strain to hear it over the rain. My mother was a slave on a plantation in Georgia. My father was the owner's son. The words came out flat, emotionless. She died when I was 8. I wasn't allowed to attend her burial. Cassandra's heart constricted. I'm sorry. When the war came, I ran north, lied about my age, joined up with a colored regiment, fought for 4 years. He shifted slightly, and she could just make out his profile in the dim firelight. After the war, I drifted west. Texas Rangers took me on despite my background, served with them 7 years before deciding I wanted land of my own. And now Colorado, Cassandra said softly. And now Colorado, he agreed. Where a man is judged more by how well he rides and ropes than by who his parents were. Cassandra absorbed this new understanding of him, pieces falling into place, his instant response to her plea at the auction, his unfailing respect for her personhood, his vigilance on the trail. Quinn Blackwood was a man who knew the value of freedom because he had seen its absence. Thank you, she said simply, for trusting me with your story. Get some sleep, Cassandra, he replied, but his voice had gentled. Long road ahead tomorrow. As she drifted towards sleep, wrapped in his coat with his quiet presence nearby, Cassandra realized that somewhere along the dusty trail from St. Louis, Quinn Blackwood had become more than her rescuer. He had become her friend. And perhaps, whispered a small voice in her heart, perhaps he could become something more. The rain tapered off before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. They set out early, making good time despite the muddy trail. Quinn seemed more relaxed than he had been in days, though he maintained his habit of regularly checking their back trail. I think we've lost them, he commented as they paused to water the horses at a small stream around midday. If there was anyone to begin with. Cassandra nodded, relieved. The tension of possibly being pursued had worn on her more than she'd admitted. How much farther to Colorado? Another week, give or take, depending on the weather and the trail conditions. Quinn studied her face. How are you holding up? The truth now. Better than I expected, Cassandra replied honestly. The initial agony of saddle soreness had faded to a manageable ache, and she had developed a genuine fondness for Penny, who proved to be as steady and good-natured as Quinn had promised. I'm finding that I enjoy the rhythm of travel. The simplicity of it, Quinn's expression warmed. It gets in your blood. The open country, the changing sky makes going back to town walls difficult. Is that why you chose such a remote place for your ranch? He shrugged, but his eyes betrayed deeper thoughts. Partly. Also wanted somewhere I could build something that was entirely mine, something no one could take away. The vulnerability in that admission touched Cassandra deeply. I hope you find that security, she said softly. His gaze held hers for a long moment. I aim to. They continued westward, the landscape gradually changing as they traveled. The lush greenery of Missouri gave way to the vast, rolling prairies of Kansas, where grass stretched to the horizon in all directions. Cassandra had never imagined such openness, such vastness. At night, the stars seemed close enough to touch, scattered across the velvet sky in uncountable profusion. On their 9th day of travel, they encountered their first real trouble. They had stopped in a small settlement to replenish supplies when Cassandra noticed 3 rough-looking men watching them intently from outside the saloon. Quinn, she said quietly as they walked back to their horses. Those men by the saloon, they've been staring at us since we arrived. Quinn didn't turn to look, but his posture subtly changed, tension entering his frame. Mount up, casual-like, we're just travelers passing through. They had just cleared the edge of town when the sound of hoofbeats behind them confirmed Cassandra's fears. Quinn's hand moved to his revolver. Ride on ahead, he instructed calmly. Keep to the trail, I'll catch up. I'm not leaving you, Cassandra replied firmly, surprising herself with her resolve. Before Quinn could argue, the riders were upon them. Three men, unshaven and hard-eyed, spread out across the trail before them. "Blackwood," called the leader, a lanky man with a pockmarked face. "Fancy meeting you here." Quinn's expression revealed nothing. "Daniels, this is a surprise." "Shouldn't be," Daniels replied with a humorless grin. "You took something that didn't belong to you in St. Louis, Mr. Thornton sends his regards and wants his property back." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Cassandra. Cold fear sluiced through her veins. These men had followed them all this way, waiting for the right moment to strike. "The lady isn't property," Quinn said, his voice deadly quiet. "She's a free woman, papers all legal and proper." Daniels spat on the ground. "Papers signed under duress don't count for much. Thornton's offering $100 for her return and another $100 for your hide." "That seems low," Quinn remarked casually, though Cassandra could see the calculation in his eyes as he assessed the three men. "Considering the trouble you've gone to." "We'll take what's owed, plus whatever you're carrying," Daniels said, his hand hovering near his gun. "No need for this to get messy." "There's always a choice," Quinn replied, his voice steady. Then, barely moving his lips, he murmured to Cassandra, "When it starts, ride hard, don't look back." Before she could protest, everything happened at once. Quinn's hand moved in a blur, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. Daniels clutched his shoulder, crying out in pain and surprise. The other two men went for their guns, but Quinn was already spurring Midnight forward, placing himself between Cassandra and danger. "Go." He shouted, firing again to keep the men pinned down. This time Cassandra obeyed, urging Penny into a gallop. Gunshots echoed behind her, the sound tearing at her heart as she rode, praying that Quinn would follow. The trail curved through a stand of trees, and she pushed on, knowing that to stop would waste Quinn's sacrifice if the worst had happened. She had gone perhaps half a mile when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast from behind. Fearing it was one of Thornton's men, she veered off the trail, seeking cover in a thicket of brush. The rider thundered past, then abruptly wheeled around. "Cassandra," Quinn's voice called out. "It's clear." Relief washed over her as she guided Penny back to the trail. Quinn sat astride Midnight, his face grim but unharmed. "Are they?" She couldn't finish the question. One's nursing a shoulder wound, the others decided the pay wasn't worth the risk. His expression softened as he took in her pale face. "You all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled on the reins. "They followed us all this way." "Thornton must want you badly," Quinn observed grimly, "or he wants to make an example of you. Either way, we need to make better time. There's a town about 20 miles ahead where we can rest the horses and maybe throw off any other pursuit." As they rode, keeping a faster pace than before, Cassandra struggled to process what had happened. Men had been willing to kill for the chance to return her to Thornton. The reality of her situation, of how narrowly she had escaped a terrible fate in St. Louis, hit her with new force. "I've brought danger to you," she said when they paused briefly to water the horses. "I'm sorry." Quinn's gaze was steady as he studied her face. "You didn't bring anything. Thornton and his ilk are the ones responsible." He hesitated, then added more softly, "Besides, you're worth protecting, Cassandra." The simple sincerity in his words warmed something deep inside her. This man, who had known so much hardship himself, considered her worth risking his life for. The realization shifted something fundamental in how she saw him and how she saw herself. They reached the town of Riverton as dusk was falling, the setting sun painting the humble collection of buildings in hues of gold and amber. Quinn secured them rooms at the small hotel adjoining this time, with a connecting door that they agreed to leave unlatched in case of trouble. After a proper meal in the hotel's dining room, their first at a real table since leaving St. Louis, Cassandra found herself reluctant to retire. The day's events had left her simultaneously exhausted and too keyed up to sleep. "Walk with me?" she asked Quinn as they finished their coffee. "Just around the town, I need to clear my head," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. They strolled through the quiet streets, the evening air cool and pleasant after the day's heat. Riverton was a peaceful place, its citizens already mostly retired for the night. A few lights glowed in windows, and the distant piano from the saloon provided a gentle soundtrack to their walk. It's hard to believe men like Thornton exist in the same world as this, Cassandra remarked, gesturing to the peaceful scene around them. The West is full of contradictions, Quinn replied. Beauty and brutality side by side, freedom and danger in equal measure. Is that why you love it? Despite the dangers, he considered this, his pace slowing. I love it because out here a man can remake himself. The past matters less than what you do today. He glanced at her. What about you? Could you see yourself making a life out here? The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Cassandra looked up at the vast canopy of stars, considering, a week ago I would have said no, that I belonged somewhere more civilized, she smiled softly. But there's something about this land, it gets under your skin. That it does, Quinn agreed quietly. They had circled back to the hotel and paused before the steps. In the lamplight spilling from the windows, Cassandra could see the fine lines around Quinn's eyes, the day's stubble darkening his jaw, the weariness and watchfulness that never fully left him. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his cheek gently. Thank you, she said simply. For today, for everything. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability quickly masked. He captured her hand in his, lowering it slowly but not releasing it. We should rest, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Early start tomorrow. Yet he made no move to enter the hotel, instead standing there with her hand in his thumb unconsciously tracing small circles on her skin. The simple touch sent warmth spreading up Cassandra's arm, settling somewhere in the region of her heart. A burst of laughter from the saloon down the street broke the moment. Quinn released her hand and gestured toward the hotel entrance. After you, Miss Blake, he said, a hint of his rare smile touching his lips. That night, as Cassandra lay in a proper bed for the first time in days, she found her thoughts returning to that moment outside the hotel. To the feel of Quinn's hand holding hers, to the unspoken current that had passed between them. She had known from the beginning that he was a good man, honorable, brave, kind in his quiet way. But somewhere along the trail, her gratitude had blossomed into something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster when he smiled, something that made her wonder what life might be like beyond Denver. Sleep came slowly, her dreams filled with wide open spaces, mountains rising against the sky, and a man with steady blue eyes building a home in a valley of wildflowers. The remainder of their journey passed without further incident, though Quinn maintained his vigilance. They skirted larger settlements where possible, keeping to less traveled routes even when it meant slower progress. The landscape changed dramatically as they pushed westward, the flat prairies giving way to rolling hills, and finally to the first foothills of the Rocky Mountains. There it is, Quinn said one crisp morning, reining midnight to a stop atop a rise. Colorado territory. Cassandra drew Penny alongside him, her breath catching at the view. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped despite the summer warmth. The land stretched before them, wild and promising. It's beautiful, she whispered. Quinn nodded, a certain pride in his expression. Another 3 days to Denver, then another 2 to my place if you're still interested in seeing it before deciding your next steps. The invitation was casual, but Cassandra caught the hint of uncertainty in his tone. I'd like that very much, she replied, holding his gaze steadily, something eased in his expression. Good. They made camp that night beside a clear, rushing stream. The air was cooler here, with a crispness that hinted at the higher elevation. After their simple meal, they sat side by side watching the stars emerge, neither feeling the need to fill the silence with words. I've been thinking, Cassandra said finally, her voice soft against the backdrop of the stream's gurgling, about what happens when we reach Denver. Quinn turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral, and I'm not sure I want to stay there. She drew a deep breath, gathering her courage. These past weeks on the trail, they've changed me, or perhaps they've simply revealed who I've always been beneath the schoolteacher's exterior. And who is that? Quinn asked, his voice gentle. Cassandra smiled softly. Someone who craves open spaces, who finds peace in the rhythm of travel and the simplicity of days measured by sunrise and sunset. She hesitated, then added more quietly, "Someone who has come to care deeply for a certain rancher with kind eyes and a tendency to rescue damsels in distress." Quinn went very still, his gaze never leaving her face. "Cassandra," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm not a man given to pretty words or grand gestures. My life has taught me to guard my thoughts, my feelings." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "But these weeks with you, they've been the best I can remember in a very long time." He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and took her hand in his. "I can't offer you the comforts of town life. My ranch is remote, the work never ending." "Winters are harsh and luxuries few. Are there wildflowers in spring?" Cassandra asked softly. A smile touched his lips. "As far as the eye can see." "Then perhaps, if you're amenable, I might postpone my decision about Denver." Her heart pounded as she continued. "Perhaps I might visit your valley first, see if it suits me." Quinn's hand tightened on hers. "I'd like that very much," he said, echoing her earlier words. Then, with characteristic directness, he added, "But I should be clear about my intentions, Cassandra. I'm not offering merely a place to stay for a while." "What are you offering, Quinn Blackwood?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer in the warmth of his gaze. "A partnership," he replied simply. "A life built together if you find you can love a weather-beaten rancher with more past than prospects." Cassandra felt tears prick her eyes at the quiet dignity in his proposal. "I think I'm already halfway there," she admitted. "The loving part, that is." Something like wonder crossed his face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it made her heart ache. When they parted, his eyes searched hers, a question in their depths. "Yes," she whispered, answering the unspoken query. "Yes to seeing your valley. Yes to exploring what's growing between us." His smile, then full and unguarded, transformed his face completely, erasing years of caution and solitude. He drew her closer, and as the stars wheeled overhead and the stream murmured its eternal song, Cassandra knew with sudden clarity that her desperate whisper at the auction block had led her not just to freedom, but to home. Denver sprawled before them, a bustling hub of activity nestled against the dramatic backdrop of the mountains. After weeks on the trail, the sight of so many buildings and people was almost overwhelming to Cassandra. Streets teemed with wagons, riders, and pedestrians. The sounds of construction, commerce, and conversation filled the air. "It's grown since I was last here," Quinn observed as they rode slowly down the main thoroughfare. "Gold and silver keep drawing people west." They found lodging at a respectable hotel, Quinn again securing adjoining rooms. After the trail dust was washed away and they had changed into their cleanest remaining clothes, they ventured out to explore the city and purchase necessary supplies. Denver was a study in contrasts. Elegant brick buildings stood alongside hastily constructed wooden structures. Finely dressed ladies passed miners in dirt-encrusted clothes. Churches and saloons conducted their business side by side. It was a city in the making, raw and vital. "What do you think?" Quinn asked as they paused for coffee at a small cafe. "Could you see yourself here?" Cassandra considered the question seriously, watching the flow of humanity outside the window. "It has its appeal," she admitted. "There would be opportunities for teaching, certainly. And some of the comforts of eastern cities." Quinn nodded, his expression giving nothing away. Since their conversation by the stream, he had been attentive but careful, as if wanting to give her space to reconsider her decision without pressure. "But," Cassandra continued, reaching across the table to touch his hand lightly, "I find myself more curious about a certain valley with wildflowers and a half-built ranch house." The tension eased from his shoulders, and that rare full smile appeared briefly. "We'll head out tomorrow, then. Just need to finish gathering supplies." Their final errand was to visit a dressmaker who, upon learning of their situation, promised to have 2 serviceable dresses and necessary undergarments ready by morning. "Not my finest work, mind you," the woman said briskly, "but sturdy and proper enough for a rancher's wife." The assumption made Cassandra blush, but Quinn neither confirmed nor corrected it, simply thanking the woman and arranging payment. As they walked back to the hotel, Cassandra found herself wondering if the idea of her as his wife had unsettled him. "Quinn," she began carefully as they entered the hotel lobby. "About what the dressmaker said, we should talk," he interrupted gently, "but not here." In the privacy of his room, Quinn paced for a moment before turning to face her. "I want to be clear about something, Cassandra. What I said by the stream about a partnership, a life together, I meant it, but I don't want you to feel rushed or pressured." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "We've known each other less than a month, most of that time spent in unusual circumstances. You're worried my feelings aren't genuine," Cassandra stated, understanding dawning, "that I'm confusing gratitude with deeper emotions." "The thought has crossed my mind," he admitted. "You've been through a terrible ordeal. I was there when you needed someone most. It would be natural to mistake rescue for romance." Cassandra finished for him. She moved closer, her gaze steady on his. "Quinn Blackwood, I am grateful to you. I will always be grateful. But what I feel when you smile at me, when you take my hand, when you kiss me, that has nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man you are." His expression softened, hope warming his eyes. "And what man is that? A man of honor and quiet strength. A man who sees me, truly sees me, and values what he sees. A man who has known hardship yet retained his capacity for kindness." She took his hand in hers. "A man I could build a life with if he'll have me." Quinn's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "I'll have you, Cassandra Blake. If you're sure, I'll have you as my wife and partner for as long as we both draw breath." "I'm sure," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, a promise and a seal. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "We should find a preacher before we leave Denver," he murmured. "Do things proper." Cassandra smiled, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," he agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. And then home. They were married the next day in a small church near the edge of town. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, witnessed only by the preacher's wife and a passing drummer who was persuaded to stay for the occasion. Cassandra wore one of her new dresses, a simple blue calico that reminded her of the vastness of the prairie sky. Quinn had purchased a new shirt and had actually visited a barber, his face clean-shaven for the first time since she'd met him. "I, Quinn Blackwood, take thee, Cassandra Blake, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he recited, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Cassandra repeated the vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperation of the auction block to the joy of joining her life with this good man's, it seemed both impossible and inevitable. "By the authority vested in me by God and the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Quinn's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, his hands steady as they held hers. When they parted, his smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. They left Denver that afternoon, their horses laden with supplies for the ranch. The trail led them deeper into the mountains, following clear streams through forests of pine and aspen. The air grew cooler and sweeter as they climbed, the world around them vibrant with late summer color. On the evening of their second day of travel, Quinn reined midnight to a halt atop a ridge. "There," he said quietly, pointing to the valley spread out below them. "Home," Cassandra gasped softly. The valley was even more beautiful than Quinn had described, a verdant bowl cradled by mountains, with a silver ribbon of creek winding through its center. In the golden light of late afternoon, she could make out a small cabin and barn near a stand of trees, a corral for horses, and beyond, rolling pastureland where a small herd of cattle grazed. "It's perfect," she breathed. Quinn's arm slipped around her waist as he drew midnight alongside Penny. "Not yet," he said softly, "but it will be." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its final descent, painting the world in amber and gold. As they approached the cabin, Cassandra could see that it was indeed modest, a simple structure built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, just as Quinn had described. But it was solidly constructed, with a small covered porch and windows that would admit plenty of light. Quinn helped her dismount in front of the cabin, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a hint of his rare smile as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A door led to a smaller second room, the bedroom, she presumed. Simple furniture crafted from local wood gave the space a rustic charm. "It's not much," Quinn said as he set her down gently, a note of uncertainty in his voice as he watched her take in their home. Cassandra turned to him, her heart full. "It's everything," she said simply, and reached up to draw his head down for a kiss that conveyed all the words she couldn't yet find. Later, after they had tended to the horses and shared a simple meal, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge above their valley. Quinn's arm was warm around Cassandra's shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "Completely," she replied without hesitation. "And you?" His answer was to draw her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than I ever thought possible." As night deepened around them, wrapping their little cabin in velvet darkness, Cassandra reflected on the extraordinary path that had led her here. From the desperate whisper of a woman with nothing left to lose, to this moment of perfect contentment in the arms of the man who had not only bought her freedom but had given her a home, a future, and his heart. "Quinn," she murmured, tilting her face up to his. "Take me to bed." His eyes, dark in the starlight, searched hers for a moment before he nodded. Rising, he offered her his hand and led her inside, closing the door on the night and the world beyond their valley. In the bedroom, illuminated only by the soft glow of a single lantern, they came together as husband and wife. Quinn's hands, so capable and strong in all other things, were gentle as they traced the contours of her body. His kisses, tentative at first, grew more confident as she responded with equal passion. "I love you," he whispered against her skin, the words seemingly drawn from somewhere deep inside him. "Cassandra, I love you." "And I love you," she replied, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. "My rescuer, my husband, my heart." Their union was tender and passionate by turns, a physical expression of the bond that had formed between them on the long journey from St. Louis. And afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the simple quilt, Cassandra knew with absolute certainty that the auction block, that moment of deepest despair, had paradoxically been the first step on the path to her greatest joy. The seasons turned in their mountain valley, each bringing its own beauty and challenges. Fall painted the aspen groves in shades of gold and amber. Winter wrapped the world in pristine white. Spring brought the promised wildflowers in riotous profusion. And summer filled the meadows with sweet grass for the growing herd. Quinn and Cassandra settled into the rhythm of ranch life, working side by side to build their dream. The cabin expanded, first a proper kitchen, then a small study where Cassandra began teaching the children from neighboring ranches 3 days a week. Quinn's cattle herd grew steadily, his careful breeding and management earning him a reputation for quality that spread throughout the territory. Word of Thornton's death reached them a year after their arrival in the valley, killed in a saloon dispute over cards, according to the newspaper Quinn brought back from town. They both felt a complicated relief at the news, knowing that the shadow that had followed them from St. Louis was finally lifted. "Do you ever regret it?" Quinn asked one evening as they sat on their expanded porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. "Leaving civilization behind for this life," Cassandra, her hand resting lightly on the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew, smiled at her husband. The years of ranch work had added new lines to his face, silver threads to his dark hair, but his eyes still held the same steadfast kindness that had captured her heart. "Not for a single moment," she replied truthfully. This is where I belong, with you." Quinn's hand covered hers, his wedding band gleaming in the fading light. "Do you remember what you whispered to me that day in St. Louis? Please buy me," Cassandra recalled softly. "The most desperate and truest words I've ever spoken." "And the most fortunate for me," Quinn added, leaning over to press a tender kiss to her lips. "For in buying your freedom, I found my own." As darkness settled over their valley and the first stars appeared overhead, Cassandra rested her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes, from the darkest moments can come the greatest light. Her whispered plea on an auction block had led her here to love, to purpose, to home. And in the end, that was freedom in its purest form. The years flowed like the creek through their valley, sometimes rushing with events, sometimes meandering peacefully. Their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Quinn's mother, arrived on a crisp autumn morning, her lusty cries filling the cabin with new life and joy. 2 years later, Samuel joined the family, followed by twins James and Sarah 3 years after that. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Quinn's expertise with cattle and horses, combined with Cassandra's organizational skills and education, made them a formidable team. What had begun as a modest operation expanded to include one of the finest breeding programs in the territory. They hired hands to help with the increasing workload, mostly young men seeking to learn the trade before starting their own spreads, and a few older cowboys looking for a place to settle after years on the trail. Cassandra's small school grew as well. What started as lessons for a handful of neighboring children eventually became a proper schoolhouse built on the edge of their property, where Cassandra taught not only reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also literature, history, and even some Latin and Greek to those who showed aptitude and interest. Their life wasn't without hardship. A harsh winter in their 5th year nearly decimated their herd. Scarlet fever swept through the valley when the twins were just toddlers, claiming 2 children from neighboring ranches and leaving Samuel weakened for months afterward. A dispute over water rights with a newly arrived rancher required Quinn to make 2 difficult trips to Denver to argue their case before territorial officials. Yet through it all, the foundation they had built remained strong. Each challenge faced together only deepened their bond, their partnership growing richer with shared struggles and triumphs. On the morning of their 15th anniversary, Quinn woke Cassandra before dawn. "Get dressed," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I have something to show you." Intrigued, she followed him outside where 2 horses waited, saddled and ready. The children, now old enough to manage for a few hours without supervision, still slept soundly in their rooms. They rode in comfortable silence as the eastern sky began to lighten, following a trail that wound upward through the pines toward the ridge overlooking their valley. When they reached the summit, Quinn dismounted and helped Cassandra down, leading her to a flat rock outcropping with a commanding view. "Watch," he said simply, his arm slipping around her waist. As the sun crested the distant mountains, its first rays illuminated their valley below. From this vantage point, Cassandra could see the full extent of what they had built together: the main house, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, the large barn and outbuildings, corrals and pastures where their prize cattle and horses grazed, the schoolhouse with its neat fence, and beyond, the homes of the hands who had chosen to settle permanently on their land, creating a small but vibrant community. "It's beautiful," Cassandra breathed, leaning into her husband's solid warmth. 15 years, Quinn mused, his voice reflective. "When I bought that parcel of land, I never imagined all this would grow from it." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "But then, I never imagined you either." Cassandra smiled up at him, seeing past the weathered lines and silver-streaked hair to the man who had raised his hat at an auction block and changed her life forever. "We've built something remarkable together. We have indeed." Quinn reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I had this made in Denver last month." Inside the pouch was a gold locket, intricately engraved with wildflowers. When Cassandra opened it, she found a tiny painting of their valley on one side and on the other, the words "Freedom" found in delicate script, Tears welled in her eyes as Quinn fastened the chain around her neck. "It's perfect," she whispered, touching the locket gently. "Absolutely perfect." "Like the woman wearing it," Quinn replied, his blue eyes warm with the love that had only deepened over their years together. As they stood there in the golden light of dawn, overlooking the life they had created from nothing but courage and commitment, Cassandra reflected on the long, improbable journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young woman on an auction block to the confident ranch wife, mother, and teacher, she had become a transformation made possible by a single act of kindness that had blossomed into a lifetime of love. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. Cassandra smiled, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "That sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. And that I am profoundly grateful for both the whisper I found the courage to speak and the good man who had the heart to hear it." Quinn's answering smile was as warm as the rising sun. "As am I, my love, as am I." Hand in hand, they turned to face the new day and the next chapter of their shared story, a story that had begun with a desperate plea and a raised hat, and had grown into a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their peaceful moment. Quinn tensed instinctively, years of frontier living having taught them both that unexpected visitors could mean trouble. They turned to see their eldest son, Samuel, riding hard up the trail toward them. "Pa, Ma." He called as soon as he was within earshot. "Riders coming, a whole party of them, looks like at least a dozen." Quinn and Cassandra exchanged a quick glance before mounting their horses. "Government men?" Quinn asked as they rode swiftly back down the trail, Samuel alongside them. "Don't think so," Samuel replied, his young face serious. "No uniforms that I could see. Elizabeth spotted them from the north ridge while checking the upper pasture. She rode to warn me, and I came to find you." Pride in their children's competence mingled with concern as they descended toward the ranch. At 18, Samuel had grown into a thoughtful young man with his father's steady nature and his mother's quick intelligence. Elizabeth, at 20, had become Quinn's right hand in managing the ranch, with an almost supernatural affinity for horses that had people coming from as far as California to purchase their stock. By the time they reached the main house, Elizabeth had gathered the twins and the younger ranch hands in the yard. At 16, James and Sarah were as different as siblings could be. James quiet and bookish, already talking of attending university in the East, while Sarah had her mother's determination and her father's skill with a rifle. "They're coming up the main road," Elizabeth reported, her dark hair so like Quinn's before the silver took over, braided neatly down her back. "Riding steady, not in a hurry. They look well mounted, well dressed." Quinn nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than alarmed. "Could be buyers for the horses. Word's been spreading about our stock." Nevertheless, he signaled to the hands to be ready, just in case. The riders appeared around the bend in the road a few minutes later. As they drew closer, Cassandra could see that Elizabeth's assessment had been accurate. These were no ragtag outlaws or government agents. The party consisted of well-dressed men and women, their horses and equipment speaking of wealth and Eastern refinement. "That's interesting," Quinn murmured beside her. "Very interesting indeed." The leader of the group, a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 60s, raised his hand in greeting as they approached the yard. "Hello, the house," he called, his accent marking him as educated, possibly from Boston or New York. "Welcome to Blackwood Ranch," Quinn replied, stepping forward. "I'm Quinn Blackwood. This is my wife, Cassandra, and our children." The man dismounted with the ease of an experienced rider despite his age, handing his reins to a younger man who appeared to be his son. "Professor William Harrington," he introduced himself, extending his hand to Quinn, "from Columbia University, and this is my expedition party." "Expedition?" Cassandra asked, curiosity piqued. Professor Harrington smiled, his eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Indeed, Mrs. Blackwood. We're documenting the changing frontier for the university's historical society." The railroads, the telegraph civilization is advancing at a remarkable pace. We're trying to record the transition while elements of the true frontier still exist. And what brings you to our valley specifically? Quinn inquired, his tone friendly but cautious. Your reputation, actually, Harrington replied. We've been traveling throughout the territory, interviewing ranchers, miners, townspeople. Everywhere we went, people spoke of Blackwood Ranch, not just the quality of your horses and cattle, but the community you've built here. A school in such a remote location is particularly noteworthy. Cassandra felt a flush of pride at the recognition of her educational efforts. The children deserve every opportunity, regardless of where they're raised, she said. Precisely the philosophy we hope to encourage, Harrington agreed enthusiastically. Would you be willing to allow us to document your ranch as part of our expedition? Perhaps share your stories of settling here? Quinn glanced at Cassandra, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, seeing no harm in the request. You're welcome to stay a few days, Quinn told the professor. We can put some of you up in the bunkhouse, others in the guest rooms. My only condition is that the work of the ranch continues without interruption. Of course, Harrington agreed readily. We'll be as unobtrusive as possible. And to show our appreciation for your hospitality, we've brought gifts from the East books for your school, seeds for your garden, and a few luxuries that might be hard to come by out here. The next few days brought a flurry of activity to the ranch. The expedition members sketched buildings, took notes on ranching operations, interviewed family members and hands about their lives. A photographer with the group set up his cumbersome equipment to capture images of the family, the buildings, and the spectacular landscape surrounding them. James was particularly fascinated by the professor and his academic colleagues, peppering them with questions about university life and eastern cities. Cassandra watched with a mixture of pride and wistfulness, knowing the day was approaching when her scholarly son would leave the valley to pursue his education. On the expedition's final evening, they gathered for a feast in the main house. The long table that Quinn had crafted years ago from local pine stretched the length of the dining room, accommodating family, visitors, and the senior ranch hands. Lantern light cast a warm glow over the gathering as stories and laughter flowed freely. I must say, Professor Harrington commented as the meal wound down, what you've built here is truly remarkable, not just the successful ranching operation but the sense of community, of family. We've been blessed, Quinn replied simply, his hand finding Cassandra's beneath the table. Indeed. The professor hesitated, then continued. Mrs. Blackwood, several of the women in our party have commented on your particular eloquence. Your background seems somewhat different from the typical frontier wife, if you don't mind my observation. Cassandra exchanged a glance with Quinn before answering. I was a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania originally. And what brought you west, if I may ask? Family connections, marriage prospects? A moment of silence fell over the table. Their children knew parts of the story, but not all. Some things had seemed too dark, too complex to share with young minds. Fate, Quinn answered for her, his voice quiet but firm. And the courage to whisper when it mattered most. Professor Harrington looked between them, clearly sensing a deeper story. I apologize if I've touched on a private matter. Not at all, Cassandra replied, making a decision. After 15 years, perhaps it was time for the full story to be told not just to their children, but preserved in the professor's historical record. It's simply a long tale and not entirely pleasant in parts. The best stories rarely are, the professor observed. And so, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the mountain night pressed against the windows, Cassandra began to speak. She told of her journey west, the stagecoach robbery, her desperate circumstances in St. Louis. Quinn took up the narrative at points, describing the auction, her whispered plea, his decision to intervene. Their children listened in stunned silence. Even the twins, usually restless during lengthy adult conversations, sat rapt as the story of their parents' meeting unfolded. So you see, Cassandra concluded, her voice steady despite the emotion the retelling had stirred, our beginning was unconventional, to say the least. But from that dark moment came everything you see around you: this ranch, this family, this life we've built together. Elizabeth was the first to speak after the story ended. "You never told us," she said softly, looking between her parents, "all these years." "Some stories wait for the right time to be told," Quinn replied, his gaze gentle on his eldest daughter's face. "And some aspects of the world are harsh realities we wanted to shield you from until you were old enough to understand. It's why you've always been so insistent about our education," James realized, looking at his mother with new understanding. "Why you taught us that knowledge is a form of freedom that can never be taken away." Cassandra nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "Precisely." Professor Harrington cleared his throat, clearly moved by the story. "Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Blackwood, with your permission, I would very much like to include your account in our historical record. It illuminates so much about the changing West, about human resilience, about the very meaning of freedom and partnership." Quinn looked to Cassandra, leaving the decision to her. After a moment's reflection, she nodded. "Yes, you may include it. Perhaps our story might offer hope to others facing their own dark moments." Later that night, after their guests had retired and the children had gone to bed, all except Elizabeth, who had ridden out for a final check on a pregnant mare, Quinn and Cassandra stood on their porch beneath a canopy of stars. "You regret telling them?" Quinn asked softly, his arm around her shoulders. Cassandra leaned into his embrace, considering. "No," she replied finally. "They're old enough now to understand the world's complexities. And I want them to know the truth of where they came from, not just the pretty parts, but the struggle and courage that made their lives possible." Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple. "You continue to amaze me, Cassandra Blackwood. 15 years, and you still surprise me with your wisdom and strength." She smiled up at him, this man who had been her rescuer, her partner, her love. "As do you, my husband, as do you." The sound of hoofbeats announced Elizabeth's return. They watched as their daughter dismounted gracefully and led her horse toward the barn, her movements confident in the moonlight. "Our legacy," Quinn murmured, watching her. "Not just the land or the ranch, but them our children, the values they carry forward." "And the stories they'll tell," Cassandra added. "Long after we're gone, they'll remember and share the tale of a desperate whisper and a raised hat that changed everything." Quinn's arms tightened around her. "A love story for the ages," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. As they stood together under the vast Colorado sky, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing but courage and commitment, Cassandra knew that the frightened young woman on that auction block could never have imagined this future. Yet somehow, in her darkest moment, she had found the courage to reach for freedom, and in doing so, had found not just liberty, but love, purpose, and a legacy that would endure for generations to come. "Come to bed, husband," she whispered, echoing words spoken years ago in this same valley. "Tomorrow is another day in our story." Hand in hand, they walked into their home, closing the door on the night and opening it to whatever adventures the next chapter might bring. The years continued their relentless march forward. James, as expected, left for university in the East, his keen mind earning him a scholarship to Harvard, where he studied law. Sarah surprised everyone by developing a talent for business, eventually taking over the financial management of the ranch with remarkable acumen. Elizabeth, to her parents' quiet pride, became known throughout the territory as one of the finest horse trainers alive. Her gentle methods and intuitive understanding of the animals drawing admirers and students from far and wide. Samuel, their steady, thoughtful son, remained the heart of the ranch operations, working alongside Quinn with a dedication that ensured the Blackwood legacy would continue long after Quinn himself could no longer ride the range. On the morning of their 30th anniversary, Quinn woke early and slipped from the bed he shared with Cassandra, careful not to disturb her rest. At 62, his movements weren't as fluid as they once had been. Years of hard work had left their mark on his body in the form of stiff joints and old injuries that ached in cold weather. Yet he moved with the quiet purpose that had characterized him all his life. He made coffee in the kitchen, a task he had taken over years ago, when he noticed Cassandra's hands growing stiffer with arthritis each morning and carried 2 steaming cups back to their bedroom. The scent roused Cassandra from sleep, her eyes opening to find her husband sitting on the edge of the bed, offering her a cup. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said softly. Cassandra smiled, pushing herself up against the pillows to accept the coffee. At 58, her once auburn hair had faded to a soft gray and fine lines mapped her face, but her hazel eyes remained as bright and keen as ever. 30 years, she marveled, taking a careful sip. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I whispered those words to you. Other times, it seems like another lifetime entirely." Quinn nodded, understanding perfectly. "I was thinking about that this morning, how different our lives might have been if I hadn't walked through that square at that precise moment, or if I hadn't found the courage to speak," Cassandra added. "Or if I hadn't heard you," Quinn countered with a small smile. It was an old conversation between them, this gentle marveling at the confluence of events that had brought them together. 3 decades had done nothing to diminish their wonder at the improbability of their meeting and all that had flowed from it. "I have something for you," Quinn said after they had enjoyed their coffee in companionable silence. He reached into the pocket of his robe and withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of wildflowers that matched her locket. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a ring set with a perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Cassandra gasped softly. "Quinn, it's beautiful." "Samuel helped me design it," he admitted, taking the ring from its box. "The sapphire reminded me of the color of the sky the day we first rode into this valley together. The diamonds represent our family, you and me in the center, surrounded by our children and grandchildren." Tears welled in Cassandra's eyes as Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, next to the simple gold band he had placed there 30 years before in a Denver church. "I couldn't give you much when we married," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is to thank you for building a life with me anyway." Cassandra leaned forward to cup his weathered face in her hands. "You gave me everything I needed, then freedom, respect, partnership, everything else we built together." Their kiss was gentle, filled with the comfortable familiarity of 3 decades shared and the enduring spark that had never quite dimmed between them. The day unfolded with quiet celebrations. Their children and grandchildren gathered for a festive dinner, the house filled with laughter and the chaos of 3 generations. James had returned from Boston with his wife and their 2 young sons. Sarah and her husband presented the latest addition to the family, a 3-month-old daughter with Quinn's blue eyes. Elizabeth remained happily unmarried but brought her longtime companion, a female physician who ran the clinic in the nearest town, and Samuel's 3 children raced around the yard with the energy only the young possess. As dusk fell, the family gathered on the wide porch that now wrapped around 3 sides of the house. Quinn and Cassandra sat in matching rocking chairs, watching as their legacy played out before them in the forms of the people they loved most in the world. "Professor Harrington's book was published last month," James mentioned as conversation flowed around them. "Your story features prominently, though he changed the names at your request. It's being quite well received in academic circles." "And beyond," his wife added. "I've heard it discussed in Boston drawing rooms. People are captivated by the romance of it, the auction block, the whispered plea, the journey west." Quinn snorted softly. "Romanticizing hardship from the comfort of drawing rooms. Some things never change." "Don't be cynical, Father," Elizabeth chided gently. "Your story gives people hope. There's value in that." "Besides," Samuel added with a smile, "the professor got most of it right, the heart of it anyway." As night deepened and the younger children were put to bed, conversation turned to changes coming to their valley. The railroad was planning a spur line that would pass within 10 miles of their property. A proper town had sprung up near the junction of the creek and river, and rumors of a territorial governor pushing for statehood circulated with increasing frequency. "The frontier is vanishing," Quinn observed, looking out at the dark outline of the mountains against the star-filled sky. Soon this won't be wilderness anymore. Nothing stays the same, Cassandra replied, reaching over to take his hand. But what we've built here will endure in one form or another. Later, after the house had quieted and their family had retired to their various rooms and cabins on the property, Quinn and Cassandra took a short walk to the small rise behind the house. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. 30 years ago, I was a desperate woman with nothing to my name but the clothes I stood in, Cassandra mused, her voice soft in the darkness. And you were a solitary rancher with a dream of building something lasting. And look what we've created together, Quinn replied, his arm around her waist as they surveyed the sprawling ranch below, lights glowing warmly in various buildings. A dynasty, practically, Cassandra laughed softly. I wouldn't go that far, but a family certainly, a home, a legacy. All from 3 words whispered in desperation, Quinn marveled. Please buy me. And the simple, decent action of a good man who raised his hat and did exactly that. Cassandra turned within the circle of his arms to face him. I've never properly thanked you for that, have I? For hearing me when no one else would. Quinn's hands came up to frame her face, his touch as gentle now as it had been on their first night together. You've thanked me every day for 30 years, Cassandra, with your partnership, your strength, your love. His voice grew husky with emotion. You gave meaning to my existence when I thought I'd live and die alone in this valley. Beneath the vast Colorado sky where they had built their life together, they shared a kiss that held all the tenderness of their 3 decades together and all the promise of whatever years remained to them. Come, husband, Cassandra said softly when they parted. Let's go home. Hand in hand, they walked back to the house they had built, expanded, and filled with love the physical manifestation of a journey that had begun with a desperate whisper and a raised hat, and had become a legacy of freedom, partnership, and enduring love that would echo through generations long after they were gone. As they reached their porch, Quinn paused, looking back at the silhouette of the mountains against the night sky. Do you know what I think sometimes, Cassandra? What's that, my love? That perhaps I wasn't the one who did the rescuing that day in St. Louis. His blue eyes, still bright despite the years that had lined his face, found hers in the moonlight. Perhaps it was you who saved me, Cassandra smiled, squeezing his hand gently. Perhaps we saved each other and continue to do so every day. With that simple truth acknowledged between them, they entered their home together, closing the door on 30 years of shared history and opening it to whatever adventures still awaited them in the chapters yet to be written.